well, we're coming up now into a time of when man's going to feel the inspiration of Te more than he has for quite some time. Since all the way back actually in one cycle and the spells in 1882 to 1916, and which is when there was this great pouring forth, particularly of the faithists out, to manifest towards Jehovah's kingdom on earth. But there were others that were attempting to manifest too their idea of what Jehovah's kingdom on earth would be. Because we're coming up to a time that's very much like that now, we can expect to see that people will be going forth, and so initially, like I said, when I was brought back, I was sort of feeling that the upliftment and the signs of the times, the milieu, and thinking, oh, wow, this, it was a good feeling. It was good to see my musician friend, but then I started, feeling a bit troubled because it didn't really go anywhere. And I mean, the people wanted it to. They were all aspiring toward that, but they lacked the understanding of how to proceed, and so I had to think about, well, what was going on here, because, like I said, no one wanted to be a dictator, and so they wanted the spirit to move them. But then they reached a point where they couldn't perceive what the spirit was, which was, first of all, starting with making the circle, the connection, and because there were some that couldn't attain to that. The rest of the group, instead of closing then and creating a circle and leaving out those who weren't going to participate and allowing them to sort of observe what was going on, so that at least some could build and then the others could join in later as they perceived. But instead what happened is that the entire thing fell apart because people wanted to include them because they were there. Because like attracts like, and there was like aspiration, so you felt that kinship, so to speak, with them, a spiritual kinship. And so you didn't want to really leave them out, but on the other hand, if you didn't close and let them, observe from the outside, then the whole thing there would be nothing there for them to observe, and everything would fall back down to that level, and so there was no rise coming. Into the higher way of living. So thinking about that, what came forth was the idea of standards. You have standards and practices, and what I mean by standards is that, well, that's what happened. Like when people they came together, they were drawn together by the Great Spirit and to do some good, but then, because of people's past, and that includes all of us here, because we're all coming and dripping from the dross of the dark period that we went through in the Hiearchian period of Bon. So we're all, coming out of that. How does one proceed? Because one feels in their hearts, the compassion and wanting to have everyone included. And yet, if you do that, then it doesn't go anywhere. And so we have to choose according to standards. What is acceptable with the other people and what isn't, and it has to do with development, and which is practice, and so. The people that initially, wouldn't go in on the circle, well, they were like young children in a candy store. I mean, there's nothing bad about that. Because there's nothing bad to say about them except they were like young children in a candy store, and they were dancing and frolicking, and essentially in the vibes, feeling good about it, and so. And so they missed that opportunity, or actually they sort of blew that opportunity. It was gone. And the people who felt all that compassion and everything and wanted them to be a part of it, they lost out too. And if you think about it, these people out there who were doing that would probably feel really badly if they knew that they had caused that to the entire group. And so we have to think, well, what is best, for the people that are inspired, to come together and do stuff. Well, it was very difficult to perceive how to proceed, and because if you can't rise, it says, we learned that in Owaspy, if the way isn't open for you to rise, you'll go downward. And so they were, reverting to their lifestyle, which is, that's the practice thing. That's the practice. And so the lifestyle itself, the practice, is built upon standards. Well, I was thinking about that in regard to faithists, because in the past a faithist was defined a certain way. You have faith in the Great Spirit, that everything and then that everything is going to work out for the better, and that was sufficient for the times, and because that was a progression for man, and from not believing in the Great Spirit. There is a foundation. What we lacked when we brought together like that was a foundation. We didn't have the foundation. What is the foundation? And when we're born, we actually have a foundation. We have an outer foundation, or the first foundation, that we're essentially aware of, and that's the corporeal foundation. The life, we call it life. We have a foundation of life. We all have life in common. That's our bottom line. That's our foundation. Life and the corporeal life, the physical life that we have. But we're also a spiritual entity. So that there is actually an S foundation as well as a corporeal foundation. Now, children, when they're born, actually, they're aware of both foundations, both the S foundation and the corporeal foundation. But then, because of the nature of the way that man is, and through his cultural practice and so forth, that the corporeal tends to get emphasized over the spiritual. And so in children, a lot of times what happens then is that the spiritual gets lost sight of, because the child is taught to focus on corporeal things that are going on, and not necessarily on the S things. Now, the angels of Jehovah still try to help the child, to perceive S and things of the spirit realm. We have these two foundations. So we have the foundation of life, which is a corporeal life. And what are the standards in the corporeal life? Well, that's the standards of the beast. That's the standards of self. We're given ourself, it's given to ourselves. And we build ourselves from that. And we can either build in S, in spirit, or we can build in corpor, the lower foundation. And so we know about the lower foundation. We know about the foundation of the beast, and the hierarchy of the beast, and the pecking order, all that stuff, and the needs of the beast, and all that. And then you have a lot of advocates for it out there in the larger social order, out in the amongst the world's people, so to speak. But here, with the S, and particularly Jehovah's Kingdom, we look to say, well, there is a foundation. There is a higher foundation. And what is that foundation? And now Owaspy has given us that foundation. It tells us. That foundation is what we call the Seventh Era Faithist Foundation. It's actually an order of light, an order of S light. And it's identified by the pledge. The Seventh Era Faithists are identified by their pledge. And so we have this pledge that a Seventh Era Faithist we do. Because what the pledge does is it sets the foundation. It gives us an aspiration, and it gives us practice. It gives us a way to practice, so we can progress from practice, our aspiration to practice, to constitutional growth, to organic growth, to crystalline growth, and so forth. This is a foundation to grow from. And a foundation is just that. It's the bottom line. And so the bottom line, we're given that in philosophy for seventh era faithists. When a person dies, we're told in philosophy that there's three things that determine where that spirit's going to go, where you're going to go when you die. So you have three things when we're told in philosophy when you die. You have your aspirations, and you have your diet, and you have your grade of service. How much time you spend serving others compared to how much time you spend serving yourself. Now those who spend time serving others rather than themselves, that's graded, and the more time you spend, helping the world to become a better place, and doing it for the benefit of all and all that, and for the benefit of doing it for the Great Spirit Jehovah. That type of service, the more you do that, the higher up you can go into the more beautiful, more fulfilling realms of heaven, the higher heavens, the heavens toward emancipation, Etheria, the second heaven up above, the atmosphere that travels with the earth. Any one of those three, if the aspiration is low, if your aspiration is just the things of the earth, well, when you die, any one of those three can anchor you to the earth when you die, and you can become earthbound. If your aspirations are such, and you're just corporeal things, and the corporeal world and the Usayan system and order, compared to the faithist system and order, but the Usayan system and order, the world's people, which is built up on the inorganic first resurrection, which has to do, of course, with the beast, and how do you deal with the beast, and allow for progression, self-progression. That's the inorganic first resurrection, self, and I want to make myself a better person. And how, and to do this and to do that, but it's for self, and you're essentially orienting toward yourself, whereas the organic first resurrection and above orients toward Jehovah and His kingdoms up above, the heavenly kingdoms, the kingdom of the angels that are above being earthbound, that are above being bound by self and self wants and self needs, and the odd thing about it is that the self never gets satisfied serving self. Eventually, they turn to Jehovah and the ways of His kingdom, the ways of His realm, the ways of His government, the heavenly government, because that's the way of peace, the greatest fulfillment for man in his soul and his heart and in his mind. That's all right there. While people might not believe that at first, but then that's why you have exemplars. That's why you have people who you can look at and say, oh yeah, well they're living, like a lifestyle that I would sort of like to, have someday. Now the Ahins, the sacred little people, the short little people, and way in the past, they were the exemplars for humanity, all the way up until about 3,000 years ago. And then we were able to, on our own, to small groups of people anyway, could live this higher life, this S life, and the Essenes lived the S life, for example, living a life that was fulfilling in spirit, but also fulfilling corporeally. Now they emphasized a whole lot on the spirit, but now in Cosmin, which is the era that we're now in, it's the balance between the corpor and the S. And so we want to develop this S foundation. We want to know what it is and labor in it, and then experience corpor through our soul. And we still live here, and we can still have good things. It's not like you give up the goodness, because we don't give up the goodness that man has been able to come forth with through his inspiration and his labor and all that stuff.